comments you got on?
Hello, good afternoon, and
Good afternoon.
welcome to another show. Richard and I are going to discuss with you why Fife's shrinking households could shape the future of the Fife property market. As always, before we get into it and look at graphs and statistics, we are going to do VT. So let's cue VT and then we'll get into it. Okay, so we are going to discuss the shrinking households that could shape the future of its property market, because smaller households are one of the reasons the Fife and the UK property market and house prices will continue to hold up well in the medium to long term. British households for the last 100 years have been getting smaller, and this trend will only drive demand for property and help give that stability and growth to house prices. Now, historically, these numbers are quite telling. Now, as always, we're going to talk about stats from a decade we weren't even born, but here we go.
But we spoke about this before. Remember, we done the show on terraced houses and things, and how popular they are like down south and the outskirts of like built up areas and things, and
Yeah.
the popularity of them as smaller house build. So this kind of falls into that as well.
It does, yes. So, looking at the household stats then, going back a century, the average number of people in a British home in 1921 was 4.3. 50 years later, 1971, still wasn't born, it had dropped to 3.2 people per household. And at the last census, just in 2022, this had dropped to today's figure of 2.36. So back in 1921, 4.3, 2022, 2.36 per household. We will, of course, drill down into this a bit deeper and really break it down for you, but it doesn't sound a lot. But if you think of it, a population remained at the same level for the next 50 years, and we had the same percentage drop in household size, the UK would need to build an additional 11.5 million properties, which is a massive number. Breaking that down even further, that's just over 230,697 to be precise, just to keep up with the smaller households.
So that was just over 230,000 a year.
A year.
Yeah.
Yes. Which, when you consider the country is actually only building 210,230, it's not really matching up. And that,
Are they actually building that much though?
Well, I don't know, because where are they? Yes. Especially for the other number, and it's so precise that 697. Yeah. So that must satisfy not only the change in household numbers, but also people, living longer. And then you've got the circa 180,000 per year net migration. We simply aren't building enough homes. Long and short of that is we're just not building enough homes to keep up with the demand.
That is the main thing, and that's the big issue that has the knock-on effect and will do in the years to come if we don't address it correctly. If the government really don't follow through on their commitments or really drive this forward to build more housing, then we're going to have we've already got a problem, but we're going to have a much bigger problem, especially as you say, people are living longer, population's rising, and this ratio for people, the amount of people that actually live in each property as well.
Yep. Mhm. And you're right, the shows all kind of flow into one, because the one that we did when we were speaking about, you know, the OAPs and the baby boomers and where can they move to, for example, and they're not being that one level living, again, because they're not building them something that's accessible and adaptable. So they all kind of flow in, but it is something that does need to be addressed, because if we break down the numbers then, so for 2023, the average household size. So United Kingdom as a whole is 2.36.
Yeah.
Now, some of the regions, can't see East Anglia on this list. If you were watching last week's show, if you're watching last week's show, you'll understand the reference to that. But I can't see East Anglia on the list.
That'll fall under the southeast.
Yeah, well, that's where they are. So if we were look at, so London's 2.57, you've got Northern Ireland the exact same at 2.57 as well.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got the southeast at slightly less at 2.43. Then East Midlands roughly the same again, 2.41. Then you have West Midlands at 2.38. You've got the East, which is sitting at 2.37, and Southwest is the same. You've got Yorkshire and Humber at 2.31, and then you've got Wales and the Northwest sitting at 2.27, with your Northeast sitting at 2.17. But the one everybody's probably been waiting for is Scotland. Now, Scotland's sitting at 2.15. So Scotland's at 2.15, the UK's at 2.36. But actually, if we bring it closer to home, the average household size in Fife is in fact 2.2. So sitting slightly higher than Scotland as a whole. But drill that down for us, Richard. What does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean that's interesting, and those kind of figures. So you're looking, well, here in Fife, if we localise it, like 2.2 people per household, in comparison to the whole of Scotland, which is obviously 15, which is slightly different. But I mean the relatively same kind of trend throughout the country, 2 point whatever people per household. So do you know, if we look at that, then we've got we've got a chart to go with that, and I'll share that, and or you could share it with us, Sophie. Thanks. So yeah, so we'll look at this in a bit of a visual context, because as I say, it's always better for us to kind of show you a representation visually. It's all one us running through all these stats, but to have it in front of you is a lot easier to kind of digest. And this is the UK tenure by household size. Okay. Now, down the vertical axis on the left-hand side, we've got the private rented, we've got social rented, we've got owned with a mortgage, owned outright, and then overall average at the bottom. Okay, along the horizontal axis at the bottom, we have running up in percentage from 0% up to 100%. I'll explain what these colours are. So the blue is one person per household. The green is 2 people per household. The orange is 3 people per household. And the fourth one in the red is 4 or more people per household. Now, let's just look in comparison to, we'll look at private and social housing. So the private housing for one person per household is 32%. And in social housing, it's 41%. In private rented, for 2 people in a household, it's 31%. And in the social housing, it's 24%. Fairly similar for 3 people in a household for private and social rented housing at 17% in private and 15% in social, and bang on exactly the same for private rented and social rented housing for 4 or more people at 20%. So you can see the same kind of trends there for 3 and 4 people in private and socially rented houses. If we look at the owned outright with a mortgage and owned outright on its own, so one person in the blue, so owned with a mortgage, you've got 17%. Surprisingly enough, owned outright, you've got a much bigger percentage as 35%. In the green, which is the 2 people per household, we've got 29% owned with a mortgage, and a really big percentage of owned outright at 46%. Now, this will fall into what we spoke about last week, Sophie, which was people at that later stage in their life who are no mortgage free, their children have all left, and they are sitting without a mortgage. And we were talking about these houses being tied up in the in the market because people can't downsize and things, and they're sitting there mortgage free. That's the way these people are. This 46% owned outright, 2 people in a household. 3 people in a household owned outright is 11%, and even lower than 8% for 4 or more people in a household which is owned outright. As I say, because the majority of people who sit in a property which is owned outright is probably going to be older retirees, which are a couple in the two, and that's where that big percentage of the 46% comes from. Overall, the overall percentage, two or more, one household's 30%, 2 or more is 34%, 3 or more is 16%, and the 4 or more sits there at 20%. So that's quite a really good visual representation, and hopefully talking through that made that a bit easier to kind of understand. But you can see the trends there, especially with the private and the social rented sectors compared to each other, and again with the owned with a mortgage and the owned outright, and that big percentage of the 46% owned outright for the two or more people makes complete sense and correlates with the stats and things that we've covered in relation to the topics previously. So most homeowners who own their property outright, which is an impressive 82%, live in the household of just 1 or 2 people, and this trend is largely explained, as I say, to older residents who are retired and their children have moved out, or maybe they're an old elderly individual living on their own. Interestingly, though, those living alone are more likely to occupy council housing, with 41% of single occupants households falling into that category. So on the other hand, the largest households, those who have 4 or more people, are typically homeowners with a mortgage. And this makes sense, as larger families often require financial support to purchase their family home. So I think the thing that really and truly kind of caught my attention there is, however, was the even distribution in the private rented sector of housing across household size. Unlike other housing sectors, the private rented market closely mirrors the national average of household sizes. So despite only accounting for about maybe 1/6 of the population, it's a fascinating balance in an otherwise kind of segmented housing landscape. So that is really interesting to me. Of course, I do lettings, and that is why that's interesting to me. So if you're watching, that will interest you as well, those figures. So therefore, I could go on to then maybe analyse the local stats. So there are 42,503, to be precise, private renters in Fife that occupy 19,729 private rented homes. Now, that's meaning that there's an average of 2.15 renters per property. Okay. But it gets even more interesting while we dig even deeper on just the private rented properties in Fife. So as it's in the rental market in Fife, that really fascinates me. We analyse those 5 private rented households and their composition figures. So I'm going to run through that with you. So 36.1% of private rented properties in Fife are 1 person per household, as I said in that. So, and then 34.3% are the 2%, and then 14.9% are the 3 people, and then 14.7% in the private rented and Fife are the 4 or more. So they are quite interesting stats, and I know I've really focused on the private rented sectors there, but it's really interesting to me. But of course, there is the interesting points on the owner mortgage and the owner outright as well.
Definitely.
So, looking at that, Sophie, what does that kind of mean for the Fife property market?
So you're right, you've got your interest in the rental, absolutely. But let's take a wee look then at, Fife's shrinking household sizes and the fact that it paints an optimistic picture for the property market's long-term stability and its growth. Smaller households mean an increase in demand for more homes overall, even if the population remains kind of steady. For homeowners, this demographic trend supports the likelihood of that long-term value growth for their properties, is what obviously we've discussed in previous shows. With fewer people per household, the demand for homes is set to continue rising, providing kind of that peace of mind that the property values will, we'll keep his fingers crossed, will hold firm in the medium to long term. You know, for potential buyers, this trend also underscores the resilience of the property market. Now, smaller households are not just a temporary phenomenon, they reflect a century long shift that's likely to persist. And again, this is what we were speaking about, the smaller household, whether it be, you know, it doesn't have to just be a flat. People again hear smaller and think, oh, that means a flat. Absolutely not, because you get your 1 bed bungalows, your 2 bed bungalows. But it is going to persist. So whether you're purchasing a home to live in or as a long-term investment, that's where your ears will prick up, Richard. A long-term investment, the data suggests Fife's property market offers stability and that room for growth, especially given its kind of alignments with the national trends. But Richard, this
Yeah,
is where you come in.
yeah, I
This
would
is
say
where it goes
so.
to the private
Yeah, I
rented
would say
sector.
so. Yeah, so this is like where the private rented sector and where these kind of demographics they shift and create the most opportunity. Really, I mean, the private rented properties are uniquely positioned to benefit from the growing number of smaller households. So in Fife, well over 2/3 of private rented properties and houses just have 1 and 2 people, as I just demonstrated in those figures. So making smaller properties like increasingly very attractive and the option that landlords look at for buy to let. Now, I know typically 2 and 3 bedroom houses tend to be, but obviously there's this market coming up and where and this does tie in with what we spoke about last week, because it's beginning to bring smaller properties that maybe you only have, say, even 1 or 2 bedrooms, more appealing, because you've got this bigger audience that's looking for these types of properties. And it's a really attractive option for landlords now, because there's a gap in the market, because people are looking to downsize. And even if they're selling up their family home and things and looking to retire, renting is probably sometimes quite a good option for them, because then they could release all their equity, pay rent for the X amount of years that they expect to live. And it's not a great conversation to have, but it's the reality. But enjoy the money that they have, or pass their money on to their family, and pay rent, and don't have to worry about repairs, don't have to worry about things, because that's all taken care of by the landlord. And that data really demonstrates that smaller households are starting to dominate the rental market. And this trend will only intensify over time as we progress in time, and say the population increases and people live older, and all these kind of factors come into that. For the Fife landlord, this means one thing, and that's focusing possibly on the smaller Fife properties that could provide a competitive buy-to-let edge, as they say. And not only is there a rising demand for 1 and 2 bedroom houses, but these properties tend to offer better rental yields as well, compared to sometimes the larger family homes, especially if they're bungalows. If you've got a bungalow or something like that, they come at a premium. They're usually positioned in a position where like a location where they have a lot of amenities on hand, and that all influences the rental value that can be attached to them. With lower purchase prices as well, relative to their obviously rental income, smaller properties are a smart choice for investors who are looking to maximize their yields and their return. So if you could pick up something that's smaller at a less price, but is renting at a higher level, in comparison to what you could achieve for a rental yield return, then you're in a win-win. You're going to have a viable investment which has got a good yield on it. You're going to have really good tenants who are going to pay you a decent amount of rent. You could reinvest in that property, or indeed further investments. So if you get it right and get the numbers right, it could be a win-win for you as an investor and indeed the tenant. So additionally, the flexibility of smaller properties makes them an enduring asset in landlords' portfolios for possibly young professionals seeking their first rental home, or that older individual who's downsizing. The demand for compact, affordable housing is broad and it's stable as well. Do you know what I mean? So like I just explained there, how it could be a really viable investment and be quite stable. And as Fife's population continues to evolve, and smaller properties will remain the concern for the rental market, and they will start to offer that consistent or consistency with occupancy rates and provide those strong returns that I just spoke about.
Mhm.
That's my rental bit, that's my lettings bit. But I think that they start to back that up, yeah.
So, you know, as Richard just said, the message is clear for landlords in Fife. Smaller households, including the bungalows, don't forget about them, are the future, and smaller properties are key to unlocking the long-term success in the private rented sector. So if you're a landlord, whether you manage your properties or work with another agent, and you'd like to discuss whether your portfolio aligns with the current trends in the Fife rental market, feel free to obviously give the office a call, ask for Richard. He'll be more than happy to speak with you. I mean, I'm volunteering you here, but he'll be more than happy to speak with you. And
I think as well, obviously, as I pitched that, and as we look at these stats and things, and the last few shows have really reinforced the fact that there is this kind of clientele there for this type of property. I mean, I'm not going to say let's discount family, because I mean, I have to say prime investment is still 2 and 3 bedroom houses, that family unit, especially in popular residential areas. But there's definitely a strong gap there, which will only continue to be apparent because of like these factors that we've covered, and that's like aging population and people not being able to downsize into property that they're going to purchase and things. And rental is a really good way for people to retire into now. So yeah, definitely. And I think what's different appealing, you spoke about other agents and things, but I think the difference between, I mean, I am a letting agent and things as well. A lot of letting agents let property, and that's fine. But there's a difference from building portfolio and property sourcing, and you know, so if it's more investor orientated, a lot of letting agents don't have the experience or skill or whatever to advise them in that way, which hopefully I've demonstrated I can. So yeah, anybody that wants to talk about investment and things, especially in the Fife area, and where to buy and what to buy and things as well, I'm always available to chat. So, and I don't know if their contact details are attached somewhere, or you could click through or message me direct on the comments, and I'll come back to you. Even if this is a rerun, guys, this is obviously live today, but we rerun our shows and things, and if you're in the comments, just jump in and I'll be able to pick them up.
Perfect. Well, that's brilliant. That has been another show from us for another week. Is it our last one of the year?
Yeah, well, we'll be back in the new year.
You're not going to forget our faces.
No, and thank you for letting me do that, run through my lettings things, but I think it's important how it relates to these stats today. So yeah, that was good.
Perfect.
Thank you.
That's brilliant. That's another week. Thank you. And any questions, as Richard said, fire them to us and we will get back to you. Have an amazing festive period and we will see you all soon. Take care.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks. Catch you the next one, and thanks, guys.
Take care. Bye for now.